This is Musicably Podcast. Welcome to Musicably. In this episode, I talk about my 10 best music books of 2025. At the beginning of each year, I do the same thing. I go back through the year and ask myself, what did the best music writers and thinkers give us? Not the music itself, but the thinking about music. The books that tried to understand what music is, what it does to us, and, increasingly, what we are doing to it. This past year I looked at around 3 dozen books, non-fiction, all of them published in 2025. And from those I chose 10 that genuinely stayed with me, that either confirmed something I have long believed, or challenged me in ways I couldn't ignore, or simply said something that needed to be said. What struck me, looking at them together, is that they are not really 10 separate conversations. They are more like 3. Some of these books are warnings, careful, documented accounts of what is being lost in our current relationship with music. Some are acts of understanding, going deeper into what music actually is, where it comes from, what it does to the human being. And a few are practical, asking what we should actually do with music, with our voices, with our attention. I will move through all 10 in roughly that order. And at the end, outside all categories, I have a personal bonus. Because some books belong on a list not because they advance scholarship, but because they take you back to the moment music first changed your life. And I think that moment matters more than any argument I could make. So, let's start with the warnings. The first book, written by Liz Pelly, is called Mood Machine: The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of the Perfect Playlist. I remember reading the book The Future of Music, Manifesto for the Digital Music Revolution by Gerd Leonard and David Cusack sometimes in the post-Napster era around 2005, and feeling genuinely excited. Music like water, available everywhere, flowing freely, accessible to everyone. It seemed like liberation. It took me years and a blog I started in 2017 to understand what was actually happening, that the same promise of abundance was quietly turning music into wallpaper and musicians into content providers competing for algorithmic favor. Liz Pelly has written the book I was eventually reaching for back then and could not have written myself. Drawing on over 100 interviews with musicians, industry insiders, and former Spotify employees, she documents in careful, damning detail what the streaming model has actually produced. Not the democratization of music, but its flattening. Playlists optimize for mood and productivity. Music designed not to be heard, but to be tolerated. And behind that, the quiet groundwork for replacing human musicians with AI-generated sound entirely. This is a national bestseller and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Prize. It deserves every reader it finds. If you read only one book from this list, read this one first. The second book by Damon Krukowski is called Why Sound Matters. Where Pelly focuses on the streaming economy, Krukowski, himself a musician, widens the frame to sound itself. What does it mean to live in a sonic environment? What do we lose when that environment is degraded, commercialized, or simply ignored? My worry here runs parallel to what I observe in the visual domain. Younger generations are losing the ability to sustain attention. Constant scrolling, a focus span measured in seconds, a preference for stimulation over depth. Sound is suffering the same fate. The new audio products sold as music, algorithmically assembled, designed for passive consumption, may be causing a similar damage to something even more fundamental: the ability to hear a melody, to follow it, to let it develop. A melody is time made audible. If we lose the patience for time, we lose the melody. And if we lose the melody, we lose one of the basic foundations of song, of musical form, of music as a language. The third book, by Christopher White, The AI Music Problem: Why Machine Learning Conflicts with Musical Creativity. The arrival of AI-generated music has produced two predictable responses: enthusiasm and panic. White, a music theorist and computer scientist, takes a more interesting position. He argues, carefully and technically, that music poses unique challenges to machine learning that other domains do not, and that understanding why this is so tells us something profound about what music actually is. My own worry about this territory is somewhat different from White's, though complementary. I'm not primarily concerned with whether AI can imitate music convincingly enough. My concern is simpler: that convenience will win regardless. We have seen this before. Betamax was technically superior to VHS tape. The CD was audibly superior to the MP3. The DSLR camera produces better photographs than a smartphone. None of that mattered in the end. What mattered was ease of access and the path of least resistance. If AI-generated music is convenient, plentiful, and free, a significant portion of the population will accept it as music, and something will be lost that may never be recovered. White's book is the academic argument behind the intuition many of us have been carrying: expect to be challenged. The second category are the understanding books. The fourth book on my list is by Elizabeth Alker, Everything We Do is Music: How 20th Century Classical Music Shaped Pop. The title alone would have made Christopher Small, who coined the term musicking, smile. This is a book about connection, about the invisible threads that run from the European avant-garde to the Beatles, from Stockhausen to Donna Summer, from Bruckner to Sonic Youth. Alker, a broadcaster and writer, argues through interviews with Paul McCartney, Steve Reich, Johnny Greenwood, and many others that the story of popular music cannot be told without the story of classical music's most radical experiments. What I find important here goes beyond musical genealogy. Musical traditions matter. You cannot know where you are going if you do not know where you came from. I've always valued Roger Scruton's writing on music precisely because he understood this, that music carries within it a kind of memory, a continuity of human experience across time. Alker's book is a popular, accessible version of that same argument, richly illustrated with the music we think we already know. Book number 5 by David Haidu, called The Uncanny Muse: Music, Art and Machines from Automata to AI. Haidu is a contrarian here and worth engaging with honestly, because his argument is not foolish, even if I ultimately disagree with where it leads. His thesis is that machines have always enabled creativity rather than stifling it, and that AI is simply the latest chapter in a long, largely positive story. And he is particularly right. Consider the piano. In its earlier forms, as harpsichord and clavichord, the keyboard instrument allowed one person to express the harmonic complexity of a small ensemble. 10 fingers commanding what previously required many hands. That was a genuine creative revolution. The piano did not diminish music, it expanded it. But the same history contains a cautionary sequel. The player piano, automatic using paper rolls, arrived and accomplished something different. It removed the musician's fingers entirely. The instrument still made sound, but the human being was no longer needed. That is the fork in the road that Haydn's optimism passes too quickly, and it is precisely the fork at which we now stand with AI. The question is not whether machines can enable creativity. They can and have. The question is which kind of machine we are building and for whose benefit. Number 6. Josephine Hogarth's Speaking, Stammering, Singing, Shouting, A Social History of the Modern Voice. Is there anything more fundamentally human than the voice? Before the instrument, before the drum, before the written note, there was the voice. The mother's lullaby, the funeral farewell, the communal song that held a village together in the dark. These things are not historical curiosities. They are, or were, biological and social necessities. Hogarth does something unexpected with this material. Rather than celebrating the great singers and orators of the 19th century, she looks at ordinary voices, singers, speakers, and stammerers, and asks what it meant in an era of increasing professionalization and medical scrutiny to have a normal voice. What she reveals is a history of gatekeeping, the normalization of a standard voice, the pathologizing of deviation, the slow process by which something spontaneous and universal became managed, evaluated, and in many cases silenced. The parallel to musical talent as a gatekeeping concept is direct and uncomfortable. The same cultural machinery that decided whose voice was acceptable also decided who was musical and who was not. This book is a social history of that machinery, described by one reviewer as a pivotal contribution to contemporary knowledge of the voice's role in society. It is also, quietly, a book about what we have lost. Number 7 by Marcus T. Pierce, Learning to Listen, Listening to Learn, Music Perception and the Psychology of Enculturation. This is the most technical book on my list, and possibly the most important for the argument that underlies everything I do at Musicably. Pierce's central thesis is that music perception depends on statistical learning and probabilistic prediction, that we learn to hear music the way we learn to speak a language, through exposure, repetition, and the gradual internalization of patterns. Different cultures produce different musical expectations because listeners from those cultures have been enculturated into different musical systems. No listener is musically blank. Every listener has learned something. I want to note a small but important distinction here. Pierce speaks of music as learned, and I agree, but I would add that learned and developed may not be quite the same thing. My sense is that musical capacity is already there, present in every human being, waiting to be drawn out rather than installed from scratch. We learn to walk, yes, but we do not learn to breathe. Musical responsiveness may be closer to breathing than we think, an innate capacity that requires a certain environment to flourish and that withers without use. Whether or not that distinction holds philosophically, Pierce's research supports the core claim. Musical ability is not a gift possessed by the few. It is a capacity shaped by experience, available to all. Book number 8 by Mark Dubey, What Musicking Affords, Musical Performance and the Post-Cognitivist Turn. I should be transparent here. This book has particular personal significance for me because it engages directly with Christopher Small's concept of musicking, the idea, foundational to my own work, that music is not a thing but an activity, a verb rather than a noun. Dubey brings this concept into conversation with contemporary cognitive science, drawing on inactive cognition, phenomenology, and James Gibson's theory of affordances to argue that musical performance is grounded in action, in the relationship between a body, an instrument, and an environment. Music is not in the head, it is in the doing. I should note that my own understanding of musicking differs slightly from Small's and perhaps aligns more closely with the German musizieren. I use the term specifically for active music making, the direct embodied participation in producing sound, not listening, however attentively, not attending a concert, however transformative, the doing itself. Dubey's work in connecting that doing to the latest thinking in cognitive science gives the concept a rigor and a reach it deserves. And now the third category, the practice books. Number 9 by Thomas Foster, Artificial Intelligence in Music and Audio Production, Shaping the Sound of Tomorrow. I include this book not as a warning but as a counterweight, and because I believe it represents a genuinely important perspective. Knowing your tools gives you power over them. The person who understands how a camera works sees differently through its viewfinder than the person who simply points and shoots. The musician who understands how a piano produces sound hears it differently, and the music maker who understands how AI tools work, what they can and cannot do, what choices they encode, what aesthetics they default to, is in a fundamentally different position than one who simply accepts their output. Foster's book is a practical, accessible overview of how AI is already being used in music production today, from composition and sound design to mixing and mastering. It is not a critical work, but used alongside the more critical books on this list, it equips the reader to engage with these tools as an agent rather than a consumer. Blind use and passive acceptance are the real dangers. Knowledge is not the enemy of music. It has never been. And finally, the number 10 by Berthe Dahlbauer-Stockbeck, Mindfulness for Musicians, Upbeat. Mindfulness has had a complicated decade. It arrived with enormous promise, became something of a cultural wave, produced its share of shallow applications and commercial distortions, and then, in many circles, began to recede. My hope, though, is that what looked like recession was actually something better, absorption, that enough people quietly incorporated its core practices into their daily lives that they no longer needed to name what they were doing. It became simply how they lived. I hope the same thing happens with musicking. Not that it becomes a movement, a brand, a course catalog, but that it becomes, for enough people, simply a part of how they move through the day. A few minutes with a tin whistle when tense, a rhythm tapped on a table when restless, a melody hummed together with a friend while walking, small, private, unremarkable, and deeply sustaining. Dahlbauer-Stockbeck's book, written by a singer, voice therapist, and mindfulness teacher, brings these two practices into careful conversation. It includes practical exercises, audio recordings for meditation, and chapters on breath, the nervous system, and performance anxiety. For musicians, it is immediately useful. For the rest of us, for everyone who makes sound, which is everyone, it points towards something larger. And finally, my personal bonus. A book by Martin Popov, 7 Decades of Deep Purple, and Unofficial History. I have seen Deep Purple 3 times in concert. Each time was an experience, powerful, loud, communal, and entirely different from anything else I know in music. But none of those concerts was where it all began for me. It began sometimes in 1974, in my grandparents' home, with an old gramophone and a brand new, my very first vinyl LP called Fireball by Deep Purple. I put the needle on the record, and something happened that I didn't have words for at the time. Something that I have spent much of my adult life, in one way or another, trying to describe. The sheer physical force of it, the sense that sound could do something to you that nothing else could, that music was neither decoration nor entertainment, but a colossal power, raw, immediate, profoundly and utterly engulfing. That moment is why I am a musicologist. It is why I started Musicably. It is why I believe with complete conviction that music is not a talent possessed by a few, but a birthright belonging to everyone. Martin Popov's book covers all 7 decades of the band's history, drawing of nearly 50 interviews with Purple alumni in a gorgeously produced full-color volume. One reviewer has called it the most comprehensive book about Deep Purple ever written. For those of us who know what it felt like to put that needle down for the first time, it is also, in its way, a monument to why any of this matters at all. And that was my list. 10 books that I believe are worth your time and one that is worth your heart. Links to all of them will be in the show notes, so you don't need to scramble for titles. They will be there waiting for you. If any of these books sparked something for you, a thought, a memory, a disagreement, I would genuinely love to hear you. You can find me at musicably.com or leave a comment wherever you are listening to this. These are conversations worth having, and I don't think they should only happen between authors and reviewers. They should happen between people who care about music, which, if you are still here, I suspect you do. If this episode was useful to you, the best thing you can do is share it with one person who you think could appreciate it. Not a mass share, just one person. Someone who you know has a complicated relationship with music, or who gave it up somewhere along the way and never quite stopped missing it. That is exactly who this is for. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do wherever you get your podcast. A new episode comes out every week, and I promise each one will give you at least one idea worth carrying around for a while. I'm Paolo Becca, and this is Musicably. Until next time, keep musicking.